Okay, so what we want to do now is in our front end to get our products, instead of loading the products file directly that's in the front end, we want to fetch it from this route here in our back end, this API/products, which returns all the products from the back end. So I'm going to close that file up. I'm going to leave my server running on 5000, and then in my front end, so I'm just going to go to a different terminal here, a different tab, and I'm going to run npm start. Actually, before we do that, there's one dependency that we need to install, which is Axios. And Axios is an HTTP library. We use it to make HTTP requests to our back end, although you could use the fetch API if you'd like. I just find Axios easier and more powerful, so that's what I always use. So just make sure you install that, and then we'll run npm start. So I have my back end and front end both running, although these products are still coming from the products.js in the front end. So we want to change that. So let's go to our home screen, because that's where we're loading them, which right now we're just bringing that file in directly. So we're bringing this file in here, but we want to request it from our back end. So let's get rid of this. And what I'm going to do for now is add products as component level state. Now, when it comes to state, you have component level and you have global or application level state. Now, products ultimately is going to be global state when we get into Redux, but for now I'm just going to make it part of this component. Now, generally, component level state will be things like, you know, if it's a menu component, you might have an open and close state. Something like that would be for component level. When you have forms, the separate fields, those would be part of your component state. But things like products, users, your cart, stuff like that is going to be global state through Redux. But just for now, we're just taking it step by step. So we're going to bring in the useState hook from React. And that's what useState is for. It's to use state in functional components, because traditionally with class-based components, you would define your state in the constructor. Well, with functions, we obviously don't have a constructor, so we use the useState hook. And the way we do that is we set a set of brackets to useState, and in these brackets we pass in two things: what we want to call this piece of state, which is products, and then what we want to call the function to manipulate or change this state, which we'll call setProducts. And then whatever we want to set as a default for products, we pass in here, which is going to be an empty array. Now, if I go ahead and save this, it should still, we shouldn't get any, like, it shouldn't break, because we still have products defined, and we're mapping through it down here. It's just an empty array. So if we go to the front end now here in the browser, we just don't see anything, any products. But there's no, like, it's not broken, there's no errors or anything, there's just nothing here. So what we want to do now is use the useEffect hook to make a request to our back end, because what useEffect does is we define it, and it takes in an arrow function, and whatever we put in here is going to run as soon as the component loads. So if we do like console log, we'll just say console log hello. If we go over here and we open up our console, you can see it's just logging hello. So as soon as this home screen loads, that's going to fire off. Now that's where we want to make our request, because we want these products as soon as the component loads. So in here is where we're going to make our Axios request. So there's a few ways we could do this. We could just say axios.get and make a get request to /API/products. Now that returns a promise, so we could do .then, pass in our response, and so on. However, I don't like the .then syntax. I would rather use async await. Now, when we use async await, this returns a promise. That means we have to call await on this. And we can't actually make this arrow function async. Like, we can't do that. So we actually have to create a separate function within useEffect. So let's get rid of this, and let's say const, I'm going to call this fetch products, and this can be async, so it's an asynchronous function. And then we're going to set const, and we could do like response equals await axios.get, and then pass in /API products. And what would happen is on this res right here would have a data object assigned to it. So we'd have access to res.data. Now, to make this just a little cleaner, I'm going to destructure data from that so that we can use the data variable directly. Now, once we fetch that data, we want to set it to this products. We want to change it from this empty array to the data that we get back from that endpoint. So we do that by calling set products, because that's what we defined above to change this piece of state. Now, this function is all set. We just have to call it. So outside of fetch products, let's call it fetch products. Now, as a second argument to useEffect, you want to pass in an array of dependencies. And what I mean by that is anything that you want to fire useEffect off when it changes. So if we have some variable called test, and when that value changes, you want this to fire off and fire off some side effects, then you would put that in as a dependency. And it generally will give you warnings if you put stuff in here and you don't claim it as a dependency. So, but right now we don't actually need anything, so it's just going to be an empty array here. All right, so if we go ahead and save this, let's look down here. Axios is not defined, so I forgot to bring in Axios, so let's do that. And this is all temporary. Later on, we're going to be using Redux, and we make all of our requests from what are called action creators. But right now, we're just doing it right from the component. So if I go to our front end now, we're not seeing any products, and we're seeing this in the console, this 404 error not found. And the reason for that is what it's looking at is localhost 3000/API/products, because we didn't define anything in here like localhost 5000. And if we did do that, we would get a CORS error, a cross-domain error. So what we want to do is add a proxy that will, instead of looking at localhost 3000, it'll look at localhost 5000. And we can add a proxy by going into the front end package.json, which is right here. Make sure it's the front end, has this React stuff. And let's go ahead and add right under name, we'll say proxy. And let's do HTTP and then 127.0.0.1, which is your loopback address. That's your local host, and you want port 5000. Now, once you add a proxy, you just want to restart your front end server. And now if we go back here, once this loads, it should work. There we go. So now we're getting the products from our back end. In fact, if we go open up our network tab and we look at products and we look at the response, you can see the data that's coming back. All right, you can also see the headers. You can see it's a 200, okay. That means everything's good. It was a GET request. The content type should be application/JSON. So we're now fetching that from our back end. Now let's do the same thing for the single page, because right now if we go to the single product page, this is still getting it from the front end products.json file. So let's go to product screen. And what we'll do here is same thing. We're going to bring in both hooks, useState and useEffect. And what we want for our state is going to be just product. Let's get rid of this, bringing in the products file, and let's get rid of this because we're going to be fetching it from the back end. So let's say const, and this is just going to be product, it's because it's a single product, and then set product, and set that from useState, and the default is just going to be an empty object, okay, because product is an object. And then I'm actually going to copy from the home screen. Let's copy this whole useEffect right here. It's going to be very similar. And let's put that here. And instead of fetch products, let's just take the S off because we're fetching a single product. And the route is going to be API/products. And then we want to get the ID from here, from the URL. And the way we do that is with props.match. So we already have match in here. And what I'm going to do is just replace these quotes with backticks so we can put a variable in here and say slash, and then we want match dot params dot and then ID. So that's going to hit whatever the ID is, and then we want set product. Make sure you take the S off of that to the data, and then call fetch product. And then product should be filled, and down here we don't have to change anything else. So let's save that. And of course we need to bring in Axios. And let's go back here. So now this should be coming from the back end. So if I open my Chrome tools here and I go to my network tab, I'm just going to reload. You'll see this one, which is the ID of the product. And if we look at the response, we're getting that single object. And that's being loaded over here. So now we shouldn't even need this front end products.js, which is, where is it? Right here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And this should all still work because we're not using that file anymore. We're fetching everything from the back end. So now I want to start to work on the back end a little bit more. I want to add something called nodemon so we don't have to keep restarting the server. I also want to use a package called concurrently so we can run both the back end and front end server at the same time with the same command instead of having to, run React here and then run Express here. So we'll get into that next.